Hello, my name's Sean, and welcome to my writing YouTube channel. As the title suggests, this channel is about the writing process and journey for writing a novel over the age of 50. I'm actually age 56. I started the book around my 55th birthday. I retired the year before at age 54, and to spend more time with my family, my wife, read more, travel. But after about 8 months of that, I decided I wanted to see if I could write a novel. I thought about it in the past, maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago. But, as all lawyers do, I was a lawyer for 20 years and thought, well, maybe I could write a novel. I didn't know what I wanted to write, but I thought maybe I could do it. And in the end, I wrote a novel which comes out in a few weeks. It's called The Devil in the Blue, 95,000 word neo-noir suspense thriller. So I had an idea for the book, kind of a kernel, but I needed a device or a genre. I actually, a later video will be on the idea of genres, which I actually don't like having to use, but that's sort of a modern phenomenon, is you have to have a genre. But because the kernel of my novel was about modern policing and some other more minor social theories, I thought a suspense or a thriller would be a good device to deliver that message. So as I also saw in the video, the sort of the topic of this top channel is writing the book after the age of 50. So the YouTube channel is going to be about the process of writing, editing, revising, maybe style, things I learned along the way, seeking agents. But for this video, I kind of want to talk about sort of the kernel, which is the idea of writing a book over 50. So there's many theories about the world of creativity, that you need to be young to do it, 20s, 30s, maybe 40s on the outside. I think there's three theories of why being younger is supposed to be better. I think the first one probably is the most obvious, which is stamina. Can you actually have the ability to spend the hours and the time? Now, I'm retired, that certainly helps. But regardless of that, do you have the stamina to work several hours a day? And I'll get into the time it took to write the book in a minute. The second one is your creativity. Can you be creative and spontaneous when you're older? I can dismiss that out of hand. That's just not even a question. If you're creative when you're young, you're creative when you're old, in my opinion. And then the last one is fluency. I think there is some legitimacy to this, not so much with age, but just practice. I think people that write, as with anything, the more you do something, you become better at it. You don't really see the practice. So after years and years of practice, like an athlete, you don't see all the practice. What you see is the final product, the match. For example, boxing, tennis. You see the final product and it looks great. Same with writing or music. You see the final product, not all the work, and to use that term, the sausage making. You don't see that. You see the end. I think writing is similar. I think when you don't have the practice to do it, then you don't have the time to get good at it. So I think there's some truth there, but I'll get to that. That is overcome, I think, by editing. The revision process, I think, takes care of the fluency, and that'll be a subject that we can talk about later. So I'm going to take the stamina maybe first and talk about kind of where I got to where I am today with a finished novel, and how the time it took. And that kind of works its way into stamina. So I started the book in April 2025, and I'm pretty accurate on the timing. So I wrote over a 4-month period about 4 to 6 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, for 4 months straight. I never stopped. Went on vacation, worked every day. That was about 4 months, and I ended it with about 150,000 words. And interestingly, I thought I was done. I finished it, and I walked outside, and I said to my wife, I'm done. I wrote a novel. Well, then I let the book sit about a month, And we can get into that in one of the later videos in terms of the process. But I let the book sit for a month, and I returned to it, and I realized, oh, it was sort of messy. It had a lot of pieces to it. And I never wrote a book before, so I didn't really have an idea of what it should look like. To me and my wife, it read pretty much like a novel. It read like a book. But then after reading it, it seemed a little clunky, to use that word. So I started rewriting it and spent about another 30 days every day, a couple hours a day, cleaning, writing, trying to get down. And I probably deleted 10 or 20,000 words. Then I decided to get out some professional help. So I engaged some editors, and the later video is going to be the cost of doing that process of hiring editors and copy editors. But I did do that, and that was another 2 months or so. They would return things in a few weeks. I would say that process took another 3 months. And that effort to revise and edit for 3 months on top of the original 4 was much more brutal. And the raw truth, as I used the word in the video title, the raw truth is the editing and revision is absolutely brutal. The writing process, the initial 4 months of work is actually fun. Writing the story and the characters and the dialogue is actually an enjoyable experience. I felt very good doing it. It was actually addictive. I'm going to say that. The editing process, though, the next 3 or 4 months of revising, it actually was painful. I can actually say it tested my marriage. And we love each other very much. And it was a very testing experience to the point where it was all consuming. We did nothing. My wife and I spent hours, my wife too, so it was double the effort. And then, so I would say all in, for my time, all the editing, all the revising, over about an 8 to 9 month period was close to 2,000 hours. And yeah, it's a full-time job. So when you see the finished product, so the stamina, it's a real thing, but not really, because if you're willing to put the time in, the time solves itself. You write every day. I had goals where I had 500 words or 1,000 words. Sometimes I had a crazy day and I'd write 3,000 words. I mean, it was just like I couldn't stop. But again, what's interesting is I ended it with 150,000 words. And after months and months of revision and cleaning and reading out loud, I brought the number down to a more manageable 95. And the book's much better for it. So I do have another 50,000 words sitting around that, I don't know, maybe for a later edition or something. But right now, that's the final product. So now I want to talk about fluency for this video. So as mentioned before, there is a question about fluency. Like, do you need to write for years and years? Is it too late after the age of 50 to have fluency? I don't think so. My opinion is it's certainly true that with experience, you get better at things. I think that's true. But just because you're over 50, your brain is still pliable enough to do it. I think you need to treat it like any other job. So you have to ignore the accusation that you're too old to do it over the age of 50. It is doable. And one of the things I learned, and this is sort of getting ahead of myself for a later video, but the key was to, when you revise and you clean and you read out loud, and there's tricks to do, I think, not tricks, but there's techniques like reading out loud, reading dialogue with someone else. When you do those things, your ear becomes developed and you write better dialogue, more realistic dialogue. You learn the voices better of each character. That is part of fluency. And that comes naturally as a human being. Human beings are storytellers. If you can tell a friend or a family member a story, then you can write a novel. That story is fluent. Now, I will end on this for fluency. There is, some people have said, I think I actually heard Lee Child, the writer of the Jack Reacher series, in an interview say a couple months ago, or I heard a couple months ago, that people are born to write or not, that you can't make someone a writer. I don't think I agree with that, especially coming from him, to be honest. I would say that there is probably some minimum intelligence, some minimum ability to be able to write. You have to be able to put a sentence together, right? I think there probably are genetic freaks that have some innate talent. I think that's mostly just because they have an elevated ability academically, IQ-wise, whatever it is. They have an elevated ability generally, and that just happens to translate into writing. I never thought I could write a book. I don't think I have any extra skill beyond. I did read a lot my entire life. That's probably a subject for another video, but I think I can just do it here. Reading a lot is by reading a lot, it does make you a better writer. My wife has this theory. She found my book, she liked it very much and thought it was a fun read and an intelligent read. For her, she has said many times that she believes the fact that I read, I don't know, I used to read probably 2 or 3 books a month. I probably read 2 a month if I'm lucky now. And that's another topic for another video, but you will spend a lot less time reading, I think, especially when you first start writing. It just consumes your time. And do you really want to read? I'd be lucky if I read 10 pages a day. But reading a lot does enhance your ability to write. It doesn't make you a writer, but I think it certainly helps you be a better writer. So whatever level you would be as a writer, reading helps. And I think the people say, oh, if you're over 50, it's too old, you're too old to be in a creative endeavor. I think one of the reasons that is simply untrue is because you have more life experience to write. And that includes what you've read, what you've heard, what you've seen. Those things do matter. They help you create a better world that is more realistic. You've seen more. You know what works and what doesn't simply as a human being. And I think that your age actually helps you and enables you to write those scenes and dialogue better. And that applies to any age, but certainly over the age of 50. So I would say I would dismiss the age category, which is the point of this video, which is don't let anyone tell you that you're too old. I mean, Frank McCourt, I think, was in his 60s or 70s when he wrote Angela's Ashes, and that's a masterpiece. So but again, I would say Frank McCourt, I think he was a natural storyteller. He was gifted, and he translated that into writing. But again, it also applies to you. If you're comfortable telling stories, or not necessarily jokes, but if you can deliver a story and a tale to a child, then you can write a book. It doesn't take, you don't need a dictionary, or I mean, for most people, you don't need anything special skills. I will end with this in terms of technique. I wrote my first 145,000, 150,000 words to 95, the entire book without a thesaurus. Now that's not I'm not bragging or saying that that you shouldn't use one, or if you can't, you go ahead and use them if you want. I think my vocabulary was good enough that I could write the book organically. I wanted the book to sound like me and to reflect the world that I know. I had read books where I'm suspicious that the person was using a thesaurus, and you can tell the words don't quite fit. The word's too big. It's either a fancy word or too complicated word, too many syllables. And I think people try to use that to enhance their writing, and I think it diminishes it. So for me, if I did have a habit, and this again will be one of the later videos, I did have the habit of using the same word. I repeated the word on accident when I wrote the initial draft. I could do it 2 times in a page, sometimes in the same paragraph. And when someone else reads your work, my wife, for example, she was very good about catching where I was using a word more than once, like an adjective, for example. And I got quite adept at actually just trying to imagine what was a better word. Should I move a word around? Maybe I can move a word to a different page or a paragraph. But your writing is enhanced with different words for sure, a variety of words. But it doesn't have to be big words or fancy words in any way. It's the correct word for what you're trying to write. So there could be a time when you need a big word, whatever that could be. I would advise against that. If you don't use the word naturally in your vernacular or your everyday speech, don't use it when you write. It makes your writing clunky and transparent that you're trying too hard. So I'm coming to the end of this video. Again, it's the first video of a series. My plan is to try to release a video every once a week, I guess, about the process as I did the process. I have one on kind of the initial drafting stage, how I started, what I kind of aimed at per day for the initial draft. And then going to have a video on the editing, kind of where I got my tips from on the internet, which the YouTube was abound with incredible professionals that you can learn from for free. Then I have one kind of on style. I have some books I'm talking about in terms of opening liners, style, that I think could be helpful. And then one on the cost of editing. So I did get many rejections from many editors, from agents, and I went the traditional route. That didn't work. So I decided to do self-publishing, and with that came I'll kind of walk you through what I spent, how I found them, what the results were like, I will kind of a spoiler alert, editing by third parties is incredibly valuable and worth every penny. And then lastly, kind of the process I'm doing for self-publishing, where I went, how I'm doing it. And that includes like, this video process in terms of marketing your work. So again, thank you if you stayed for the entire video, I appreciate it. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to hear more videos, which I do have them coming out every week. Again, my name is Sean Maclean. My novel, which is coming out soon, is Devil in the Blue. And thank you for your time.